checkbox to make sure that we're just checking off what it means to be a kingdom citizen and actually missing the heart of what it means to be a kingdom citizen. And so let us not miss this. So think about this, that before we get to verse 7, before we get to the beatitude number 4, that we've already talked about that we are poor in spirit, and that we mourn over sin, and that we are meek, and that we are not of a righteousness of our own, and that then is why we can be merciful. Right? We rightly understand what it means to be merciful because we have rightly understood that we've been shown mercy. Right? To know mercy is to show mercy. Right? Mercy known is mercy shown. And then we can't rightly understand what it means to show mercy till we rightly understand what it means to be shown mercy. Think about what Jesus has already promised us. Jesus has promised us His kingdom. He says, I will give you the kingdom of heaven. Jesus has promised us His comfort. Jesus has promised us His creation. And Jesus has promised us His own righteousness. Why? Because we deserve it? Because we've done something to earn it? No, not at all. Not by our merit at all, but only because He is a merciful God. That's alone why we are then able to show mercy to others. So we have to rightly understand the mercy of God, which we've explored the last 4 weeks and how God has extended His mercy to us. But then this week we see how it shifts, and now we're to extend that mercy to others. So there's a few questions that we're going to seek to answer that you should be asking yourself this morning and that I seek to answer for you. Number one is this: what is mercy? What is mercy? Number two, what are the hindrances of being merciful? What does it mean to obtain mercy, or what is the benefit of mercy? And then what does it look like to be merciful? So, what is mercy? Right? Mercy has often been taught as a sort of a very close connection to grace. Right? It's sort of two sides of the same coin. Grace is one side and mercy is the other side. It's often been said that grace is receiving what you don't deserve, and mercy is not receiving what you do deserve. And, which is true, but I want to sort of press our minds in a different way this morning. I want us to think about the idea that grace acts toward the cause of sin, while mercy acts toward the effects of sin. That grace tends to focus on the pardon of sin, when mercy tends to focus on the pain of sin. And so that mercy is actually this idea of entering into and engaging in the effects of what is taking place, the result of sin. Mercy is often translated in the New Testament as compassion. But this compassion that is often geared towards Jesus having compassion on others it says that Jesus had compassion on them, so He healed their hand. Or Jesus had compassion on them, so He fed them. Jesus had compassion, and He did it. So mercy, this word that is often translated compassion, is a deep feeling and sense of care for someone's situation, but it doesn't just care for someone's situation, it enters someone's situation. It engages someone's situation. It helps someone's situation. It acts on someone's situation. So it's not just a feeling, it's a feeling that acts. So this is mercy. In 2011, Syria, the nation of Syria, began or fell into a civil war that's been devastating. Some 400,000 people have been killed or have died in the time of this civil war. The regime of the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad was brutal. As a dictator, he would just sort of rain bombs down on innocent civilians, oftentimes intentionally hitting humanitarian outposts or even safe places such as schools. And in the midst of this devastation and destruction, there was a sort of a glimmer of hope that arose. It was guys that were trying to fight and protest against the regime that put their weapons down, and 25 of them formed a group called the White Helmets. And now there's over 3,000 of these white helmets, and these white helmets are sort of a humanitarian aid that their job is to respond into devastation or destruction. When a bomb blasts, they position themselves to be the first ones to run into the rubble and begin to immediately pull bodies out of the rubble, trying to save as many as they can. Up to this point, over 60,000 people have been saved from bomb blast and rubble and destruction because of the white helmets. Wow. 150 of them have lost their own lives. This is what it looks like to extend mercy. Mercy is running into the destruction and the devastation to pull people from the rubble. Mercy is positioning yourself to those near to those in need. Mercy is setting aside yourself to enter into the sufferings of others. The Bible has a really beautiful picture of what mercy looks like. It's called a story called the Sermon or the Good Samaritan. When Jesus is having a conversation with a lawyer, and they engage in conversation, and Jesus begins to explain to him what it means to love your neighbor. We're going to read this story together. It's on the screen in front of me, or in front of you behind me. It says this, it says that Jesus took up the question. He said, there was a man going down to Jerusalem, to Jericho, and fell into the hands of robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and fled, leaving him half dead. And a priest happened to go by down the road, and when he saw the man laying on the road, he passed by on the other side. And then a Levite comes by, and when he arrived at the place and saw the man, he too passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan on his journey came up, and when he saw the man, he had compassion, he had mercy on him. And he went over to him, and he began to bandage up his wounds, and he began to put olive oil on him, and began to put wine on him, and he began to put him on his animal, and he began to walk him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took the 2 denarii, and he gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him. And when I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever else you spend. And Jesus asked the question, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And the attorney said, rightly so, the one who showed mercy. The one who showed mercy. And Jesus said, that is correct. Go and do the same. So mercy, as we can see from this picture, from other examples of mercy like the white helmets in Syria, there are 3 aspects that we know of what mercy is. There are 3 things that mercy is. Number 1, mercy sees the need. It sees the need. Number 2, it empathizes with the need. And number 3, it acts. And so let's talk about that. The 3 aspects of mercy. If God has called us to be a merciful people, we have to ask ourselves, what is mercy, and how do we then be merciful? 1, we have to see the need. See the need. That God, the first act of mercy toward us was that he saw us in our condition. His first act of mercy toward us is that he saw our condition and he entered into it. We often live such isolated lives that we often miss the needs of those around us. Even when we pull up to the red light, we immediately pick up our phone and begin to think about something else and miss the needs around us. We can get so caught up on our own needs that we actually forget the needs of others. We get so accustomed to seeing needs that we actually forget that they're actually needs. And so the first thing that mercy does is mercy sees the need. Being merciful is to intentionally position ourselves where needs are. It's intentionally recognizing within our own communities, in our own schools, in our own families, in our own workplaces, in our own cities, that there are needs out there, and we're positioning ourselves to have our eyes open to be merciful. But number 2, mercy empathizes with the need. The idea of empathy is, I think, and I like to describe it in a way, is more than sympathy. Sympathy is trying to understand someone's situation. Empathy is a deep care and concern that it's willing to carry one another's situation. Empathy enters in with a deep care and compassion for someone, so deeply that they're so moved, not just emotionally moved, but they're actually moved to act. It's empathizing. That when Jesus, whenever he looked down upon those, he empathized with them. He had compassion, care, a concern so deep that he was willing to take their burden upon himself. This is exactly what Paul tells us to do in Galatians 6 when he says, carry one another's burdens. Endure one another's burdens. This is to be merciful. But not only is it just a deep care and concern, but it's a deep care and concern that acts. Right? And mercy acts. It does not step back. It does not ignore. It does not pass by on the other side. But it engages in, it acts, much like the Good Samaritan did. The Good Samaritan saw the need. He empathized with the need, but he immediately acted on the need. He didn't walk around, but he picked the man up and put him on the back of his donkey. And he met the need. Here's the truth about mercy and the truth about acting, is that mercy is an action that costs. Mercy is an action that will always cost you something. It will cost you your time. It will cost you your money. It will cost you your emotions. It may even cost you your health, much like the Good Samaritan. I'm sure he was going somewhere. I'm sure that he had somewhere to be. I'm sure that he had an agenda that he was taking care of, yet he took time out of his day. He took time out of his route. He took money out of his pocket, and he met the need of the one who was in need. He was merciful. In fact, I think it is the cost that is one of the hindrances of us showing mercy. There are two hindrances, the cost and the trivial. But I think oftentimes that the cost is the first thing that we begin to ponder over when we see somebody's need. We see a need. We know that there's something there. We may even have some sort of feeling toward it. But what immediately comes to mind is, what is it going to cost me? And if I say yes to you, then what I'm having to say is no to myself. I see the need, but I don't want to pay the cost right now. Look, mercy is always impossible when we're counting what it will cost us. We're never going to be a merciful people if we're always worried about ultimately what it's going to cost us. And so rather than us thinking about and continually thinking about and always thinking about what is it going to cost me if I'm merciful to someone else, we need to shift our way of thinking, and we need to immediately be thinking, what did it cost God when He was merciful to me? Because when we begin to ask ourselves and ponder over and remind ourselves what it cost Him, then our cost will pale in comparison to what it cost Him. And so when we remind ourselves how we have been shown mercy, then it should then be a no-brainer that we should be able to show mercy because of what it cost Him. It cost Him all that He had. But it's not just the cost, I think, that hinders us from being merciful people. I think it's the trivial. I think it's the things that they're less important, or the things that aren't as weighty, the things in life that tend to busy us but aren't things that matter much in life. Jesus seems to point this out to the Pharisees and the scribes in Matthew chapter 23 when He says it this way. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You pay 1/10 of mint, dill, and cumin, yet you have neglected the more important matters of the law." You've neglected the more weighty matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These things should have been done without neglecting the others. You strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel. This is what Jesus is saying. He's going, look, you look good, you tithe. In fact, you tithe on every little bit of thing you have. Everything you grow in your garden, every dill or cumin or whatever you grow, you even tithe on those. And those are really good things. And you should do that, but you shouldn't do that to the neglect of mercy. He says, you've missed the weightier things of the law. You've missed the more important things. And then he gives a little example of the gnat and the camel. So they would take their water, or they would take whatever they were drinking out of, and they would put it through a strainer so that it would catch any gnats or any flies in the strainer, because if they happened to swallow a gnat or a fly, then maybe they would become unclean. Maybe they wouldn't be so religious anymore. They would be unclean if they swallowed a gnat. But what Jesus is saying is, look, you think you're clean by doing the religious activities, but you're not even showing mercy to someone, and you're swallowing a camel. You are missing the weightier things. It's like Jesus coming in here and saying, look, you go to church all the time. You even give religiously. You have perfect Sunday school attendance. And all of those things are great. And you should never neglect them. But they should never be to the expense of other things. Or the weightier things. Mercy. Right? So, Jesus says, don't get yourself caught up on the trivial things in life. Think about the Good Samaritan. Think about the priest and the Levite. Could you imagine being beat up on the side of the road, needing anyone's help? And the pastor walks by, and you're thinking, yes, I recognize this guy. He's the pastor of the church up the street. It's exactly what I needed. It's an answer to my prayers. Oh no, where's he going? He's walking around on the other side. Oh, the worship pastor's walking by now. Those are good guys, right? They're the ones that lead us in worship every week. Wait, where's he going? He's walking by on the other side. Think about it for a minute. And then it's the Samaritan. If you're a Jew and you're thinking, oh no, not the Samaritan. Yet it's the Samaritan who stops and helps, right? Think about the priest and the Levite for a minute. Maybe it's not that they didn't care. Maybe it's not that they didn't see. Maybe it's not that they didn't empathize. Maybe they wanted to. But maybe they just didn't want to become unclean. Maybe they wanted to remain religious. Maybe they wanted to continue to worship God the way they were worshiping God, and in their mind, that was what was more important. But Jesus says, no. That's not what's most important. What's most important is mercy. What's most important is not that you're doing all these religious activities, but the love that you've been shown, you're showing to others. That's what's most important. So I think there's a couple things that hinder us from showing mercy, and that is the cost and the trivial. How incredible would it be for us to be a church that doesn't just recognize what it means to go to church and not just recognize what it means to come to a place and do this every week, but that we'd be a church that actually is the church, that we be the church outside of these walls, that we would be a church that actually becomes attractional. And not that we attract people because we have a good worship leader or a good worship band, and not that we attract people because we have a good preacher, but that we attract people who walk in here and go, I have heard how you are merciful. That we attract people to be a part of what's going on here because of the mercy that we're showing here. That we are merciful people. How incredible would that be? So what then is the benefit of being merciful? Well, Jesus tells us that we will be shown mercy. Well, hold on a second, Jesus. Haven't we already been shown mercy? Haven't we already talked about? Isn't that the point? That we couldn't be merciful if we haven't been shown mercy? So why is it that then we'll be shown mercy? Does our salvation in some way hinge upon our ability to be merciful? Isn't it a contradiction to mercy itself that if I earn mercy, then it's actually not mercy at all? Right? You don't earn mercy, you earn a wage. So if I do something in order to gain something, then it's not mercy at all, it's a wage. Right? So what could Jesus be talking about here? Well, I think that Jesus is in some way, implicates that there is some aspect of the consummation of our salvation, that is the final aspect of our salvation or judgment, that hinges upon us being merciful. Such that Jesus recognizes that if someone claims to be a kingdom citizen but does not show mercy, what they're indicating is that they've not been shown mercy. That Jesus stakes the two so close together that he's willing to stake our entire judgment upon it. That those who have been shown mercy will show mercy. There's no other way. I'll be honest with you. As I wrestled over it this week, I was a little uncomfortable with that. I think we wonder sometimes, and I often ponder sometimes, what will it look like? What will Jesus say when we stand before him? When I'm standing before Christ, what will he ask me? Did you accept me into your heart? Did you pray the sinner's prayer? Did you walk the aisle? Were you baptized? Or will he say, did you show mercy? I'll be honest with you, I think that's uncomfortable for us this morning. But I think Jesus explains exactly what that is in Matthew chapter 25. When he shares this. He says, when the Son of Man returns, when the Son of Man comes in all of his glory with his angels to sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him. That is when we are standing before him. He will ask some questions, and here's what he will say. He'll begin to separate the sheep from the goats. He'll begin to separate those who are kingdom citizens and those who are not kingdom citizens. Those who ultimately show mercy and those who do not. He says this, that he'll put the sheep on the right and he'll put the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. And then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you and see you thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger and take you in, or without clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick and in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you that whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And then he will say to those on the left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you didn't take me in. I was naked and you didn't clothe me, sick and in prison and you didn't care for me. And then they too will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or without clothes or sick or in prison and not help you? And then he will answer them, I tell you, whatever you did not do for the one of the least of these, you didn't do for me. So what's interesting here is that Jesus' heart is so closely connected to those who are suffering, those who are sinners, those who are in need, that he says that when you show mercy to them, you are showing mercy to me. That it is so interrelated that those who have been shown mercy are those who show mercy. And Jesus is willing to stake our judgment upon it. Willing to say that if you're a part of my kingdom, that there's no way that this wouldn't describe you. So the question then we have to ask is, what does it look like to be merciful? It would have been nice if Jesus answered that question, right? It would have been nice if Jesus described what mercy was for us. In the time, it would have been nice if he would have given a list of what it meant to be merciful. Instead, if you would just do this, this is what this means. And in some way, he did mention that. In some way, in that story in Matthew 11, he said those who are hungry or thirsty or naked or in prison or whatever. And so we have to ask ourselves, what does it look like to be merciful? And so I kind of broke it up into three different stages, three different levels. Globally, locally, and personally. Right? Mercy transcends globally. Let's think about this globally. Mercy transcends nationalities. Mercy transcends race. Mercy transcends borders. Mercy transcends economic levels or economic differences. This is exactly what happened in the Good Samaritan. Jews and Samaritans hated one another, yet the Samaritans showed mercy. This is exactly what Jesus did for us, that when he looked upon us and had compassion and entered into our situation, we weren't like Jesus. We weren't the same race as Jesus. We didn't live in the same place as Jesus. We didn't have the same worldview as Jesus or the same mindset as Jesus. Yet Jesus transcended those and showed us mercy. James speaks in the broadly sense of the true religion as caring for widows and orphans. And so as we look globally, even as we look here in the United States, of what that actually means, there are over 400,000 orphans in foster care in the United States alone. 400,000 orphans in the United States alone. When we think about global mercy, whether that's digging wells in Africa, whether that's serving bottles of water to refugees, that we are called to be a merciful people. This is why we go on foreign mission trips. This is why we spend money to send people overseas. Because we recognize that there is a need. And because we have been shown mercy, we want to go show mercy. To be a merciful people, we have to open our eyes, we have to empathize, and we have to act. And you're probably thinking in your mind right now, we can't save the world. We can't meet every need, which is correct. However, if one of those things that I just listed makes you uncomfortable, orphans, widows, foster care, adoption, digging wells in Africa, serving refugees, then we have a wrong understanding of what mercy is. And it's not that we have to meet every need, but that none of us are exempt from meeting a need. That's mercy. Mercy is a disposition of the heart that's willing to go wherever God calls us to go. Whether it's globally, when there's a natural disaster or an earthquake or a hurricane, meeting the needs of those globally, or whether it's locally. That we recognize and open our eyes and recognize the needs in our own community. And the best way to do that here in our own community, in our local community, is through our school district. There's no better way to open our eyes to the needs of this area without looking at and examining the needs in our schools. That in Community ISD, 50% of our students are on free or reduced meal plans. Compare that to somewhere like Wiley that is 20%. Do we have a large economic need in our community? And that we must open our eyes to it, empathize with it, and then ultimately act on it. That these students need backpacks, and we'll do a backpack drive in August, as we often do. That we often give these students Christmas presents. That there are numerous amounts of needs within our own communities, specifically in our own school district. Globally, locally, and then personally. What would it look like then to personally live in light of a merciful heart? Well, there are direct relationships that you have with those in your family, those in your workplace, and those in your church. So it may be simply visiting someone in the hospital. It may simply be making them a meal and taking them a meal when they get out. It may simply be helping babysit someone's kids so they can get rest. It may be entering into a broken marriage that's on the verge of divorce and being a godly example and speaking biblical wisdom into such a messy situation. It may be not just voting for policy change and for pro-life sort of agendas, but it may be not that we're just in favor of the babies, but that we're also in favor of the mamas. That we enter into their lives and we help their economic situation. Maybe it's that we open up a door of our house and we give them a place to stay. Maybe it's when people are being abused and we open up our homes. Maybe it's simply having somebody over at our house around a meal. Maybe it's being kind and showing forgiveness to those who have wronged us. The mercy plays itself out in so many different areas. The mercy is not anything in particular as much as it's a disposition of the heart to go out and meet the needs of someone else. This is mercy. And this is what it means to be a kingdom citizen. May we be a church that is described or characterized by our mercy toward others. So how else do I end this sermon without calling us to one of two things? One, if you're here this morning and the Holy Spirit's convicting your heart that you have not responded to the mercy of God that has been shown to you, then you respond to His grace and His mercy this morning. There's no way that you can be a kingdom citizen and show mercy unless you've been shown mercy. And then if you're a kingdom citizen this morning and you find yourself struggling with the ability to show mercy, or that you just didn't take mercy seriously, or that there's hindrances, cost, and trivial things that are hindering you from being merciful, may I just point and ask you, one, to fix your eyes upon Jesus, who has been most merciful to you. But then may I ask you to open your eyes to the needs around you, empathize with those who are in need, and act. Meet somebody's need in your community. Let me pray for us.